What would you do if the seat you paid for your rightfully earned place was taken from you with a smirk and a single word? Move before you answer. Breathe in this moment, a black woman CEO. Calm and prepared. Slides into 1A with tomorrow's breakthrough in her bag and watches her dignity put on trial in front of a silent cabin. This isn't a viral tantrum. It's the quiet violence many of us recognize status used like a weapon, rules bent by entitlement, and a crowd that hopes the scene will end if the person with less power simply gives in. But today, there's a problem no one expects seconds later. The flight is grounded and the real story begins. If it were you, which choice would you make? Surrender the seat to keep the peace, or hold your ground and risk the turbulence that follows. Protect your work in silence or speak document and invite accountability into the aisle. Close your eyes for one beat. Imagine your own 1A the job, the meeting, the space you've earned. Imagine the whisper that says you don't belong. Now imagine you choose to stay. What changes on that plane, in that company, in the people watching from 2 rows back? This is not just an airplane story. It's a map through prejudice and power about leadership that is steady, not loud, allies who step in, not over, and a woman who refuses to be moved from the seat she already owns. If you're ready to feel your pulse quicken, your memory ache, and your hope return, come take this flight with us. If the story resonates, please like, share, and subscribe. Then buckle up. We're wheels up. The sky over New York was a brighter blue that morning than usual. Sunlight filtered through the giant windows of JFK Airport, reflecting off the line of people waiting at Gate 12. Zoe Harper took a deep breath as the announcements blared. She was used to mornings like this: weak coffee, a packed suitcase, and a to-do list longer than a coast-to-coast flight. Zoe is not a showy person. Even though she is the CEO of Novalink Systems, a technology company valued at hundreds of millions of dollars, she still likes to do everything herself, check in herself, carry her laptop, even call a car to the airport. Keeping busy helps clear her mind. She once told her assistant, "Today, she flies to San Francisco for the Global Tech Summit, where she will launch Atlas, an AI platform that helps small businesses automate their manufacturing processes." This project has been Zoe's heart for the past 4 years. She has turned down many investment offers to maintain control, partly because she wants to protect the value of her team, and partly because she knows she will always be watched more closely than others, especially as a black woman in tech. Zoe adjusted her black coat and looked around the queue. Everything looked normal. A group of businessmen were discussing stocks. A young mother was trying to calm her crying child. In the far corner, a middle-aged man was talking loudly on the phone, his voice carrying the confident tone of the powerful. When the boarding gate opened, Zoe boarded with the first-class passengers. She smiled at the flight attendant, Megan, a young woman with neatly tied blonde hair and a pleasant smile. "Good morning, Ms. Harper. You're in seat 1A, right next to the window." "Thank you, Megan," Zoe replied softly, placing her small bag in the overhead compartment. She always chose seat 1A, not just because it was convenient, but because it gave her a few minutes of quiet before takeoff. Sitting down, she opened her laptop and checked her presentation. The AI Atlas simulation appeared, the data stream, the map, and the smiles of the engineers behind her. In a few hours, it would all be released. Zoe leaned back, breathing out softly. For the first time in weeks, she felt ready. A male voice behind her said, "Excuse me, are you sitting in the wrong seat?" Zoe looked up. The man behind her was looking at her suspiciously. He had graying hair, an expensive suit, and a cold, confident gaze. "I think this is my seat," he said, his voice calm but sharp. Zoe looked at her ticket, then at the seat tag. One eye. "That's right. I think this is my seat." The man smiled faintly. "No, I always sit here. Every flight." "Are you sure?" His voice was loud enough that a few people turned to look. She felt eyes curious, awkward, and a little judgmental on her. In that moment, Zoe didn't just hear his question. She heard what he meant. She could have just kept quiet, given up her seat. It would have been easier. But a part of her, the part that had been ignored in meetings, that had been underestimated because of her color and gender, refused to do so. She gently put down her laptop, looked up, and said calmly, "You can check your ticket again. This is seat 1A, and it belongs to me." The man looked at her, the smile on his lips disappearing. "Do you know who I am?" Zoe kept her eyes on him. "It doesn't matter. Rules are rules." The air in the cabin seemed to freeze. Megan, the flight attendant, approached, trying to calm things down. "Excuse me, gentlemen. Let me check the seating list again." As Megan left, Zoe heard a small whisper behind her. There it is again, always playing the victim card. She didn't turn around. She just looked out the window, where the light was fading on the wings of the plane. Something inside her was stirring, an old feeling, but never quite familiar. Zoe squeezed the armrest. She remembered what her father had told her when she first started out. You can't control how people see you, but you can choose how you stand. And when necessary, you can choose not to give up your seat. She nodded slightly, as if to answer the man who had passed away many years ago. The plane had not yet closed its doors, but she knew in her heart this flight would not be normal again. The air in the cabin was thick enough to be felt. Megan returned with a printed list. Her eyes flickered to Zoe before settling on the man standing there. "Richard Bowen." "Mr. Bowen. The system shows your seat as 3C. Seat 1A belongs to Ms. Harper." Zoe saw the annoyance cross his face. He gave a forced smile, the kind people used when they didn't want to admit they were wrong. "It must be a mistake. I always sit here. I've been flying with this airline for over 10 years. "Yes, but the system confirmed differently today." "I'm sorry." Megan tried to keep her voice neutral. A few passengers started whispering. Some chuckled. Some looked out the window, pretending not to hear. But Zoe could feel the look. A black woman, anyone, anywhere in this situation always felt that look. It wasn't just curiosity. It was doubt and suspicion that she was being too sensitive. Richard leaned down and spoke softly, but loud enough for someone nearby to hear. "You know, sometimes people who fly first class for the first time don't understand the rules." Zoe took a deep breath. The words needed no other words to convey their meaning. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've flown first class more than 20 times this year, sir. I think I understand the rules." Her voice was soft but firm. A male passenger in row 2 glanced over, a look of approval in his eyes. Then he turned away, avoiding the trouble. Megan looked at both of them and said softly, "Please sit in your seat so the flight can depart on time." Richard mumbled something, then turned towards row 3. Before leaving, he tilted his head and whispered, "There are people in this world who don't know their place." Zoe didn't answer. She looked down at her hands, her fingers clenched tighter than she'd realized. Her heart pounded in her chest. That familiar feeling repressed anger. Unspoken hurt came back. The plane began to unload the last passengers. Megan went to check her seatbelt. Richard sat in row 3, laptop open, not looking up. Zoe opened the window and looked out. The morning light slanted across the tarmac. The luggage carts rolled slowly by. For a moment, she saw a reflection in the glass, a brunette sitting in row 2, staring at Zoe's laptop screen. It was only a moment, but the look made Zoe feel strange. She turned the computer away slightly, then smiled to herself. Maybe it was just her imagination. As the plane taxied onto the runway, the captain's voice came over the loudspeaker. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Miles Jefferson. We will be taking off in a few minutes. Estimated flight time to San Francisco is 5 hours and 30 minutes. Zoe looked up. Miles Jefferson, she'd read about him in the airline magazine, one of the airline's first black captains. She felt a pang of relief. She closed her eyes, trying to clear her head, but a few rows back, Richard was calling in a low voice. "Yeah, I'm here. She's on this trip, too. No, don't worry. I'll take care of it." Zoe opened her eyes. She couldn't hear the whole thing, but her gut told her something was wrong. Before I could think further, the plane suddenly stopped. The engine noise gradually died down. Passengers looked up, bewildered. The captain's voice came through the loudspeaker, calm but serious. "I'm sorry. We just received a request from airport security. The flight is temporarily unable to take off. Please remain in your seats." Megan paced the cabin, her face tense. Zoe looked around, trying to figure out what was going on. Richard kept his head down, pretending to be busy on the phone. A moment later, 2 security officers boarded the plane. Their voices were deep and serious. "Excuse me, we need to verify some information with a passenger." Zoe felt her heart slow down half a beat as their eyes turned to her. "Miss Zoe Harper, please." "We need your cooperation to get off the plane to clarify." The silence was so deep that no sound could be heard. A female passenger let out a soft, "Oh my God." Zoe sat still for a few seconds. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice still calm. "We received reports that you may be storing or photographing classified documents while the plane was preparing for departure." Megan gasped. "No way!" She just opened the presentation slides, but the 2 security guards did not change their expressions. "Please get off the plane. This is just a formality." Zoe stood up, gently closing her laptop. Anger and fear collided inside her. Half of her wanted to scream that this was absurd. The other half told her to calm down. She looked toward row 3. Richard looked down, avoiding her eyes. "Okay," Zoe said. "I'll go with you." As she walked across the aisle, Megan gently took her arm and whispered, "I'm sorry. I know you did nothing wrong." Zoe nodded slightly, not saying anything. She stepped out of the cabin, the eyes of dozens of passengers following her like shadows. The plane door closed behind her. She heard the captain's voice on the radio, low but tense. "In the hallway?" Zoe asked. "Who reported me?" An employee replied, "That information cannot be released yet. But the person who filed the report was a passenger on the flight." Zoe paused. She took a deep breath. The image of the brunette flashed through her mind. That looked more than just curiosity. Her steps grew heavier as she entered the security room. Each step felt like walking into a storm she didn't know she had the strength to weather. She recalled her father's words, "Keep calm, not because you are weak, but because you understand that true strength lies in not being dragged down." Zoe looked up. Despite her fear, she knew this was only the beginning. The JFK interrogation room was smaller than Zoe had expected. The ceiling was low. the fluorescent lighting dim, and the smell of cold air conditioning mixed with the scent of fresh paper. On the table were a glass of water, some transcripts, and a tape recorder. 2 security officers sat across from her, polite but distant. She was still stunned not by fear, but by the absurdity of it all. One person spoke first, his voice low and steady. "Miss Harper, we just need you to confirm that there is no classified data on your computer. This is required procedure when there is a report." Zoe looked him in the eye. "Who reported?" "Sorry, we can't reveal it yet." She nodded, smiling slightly. "So someone can accuse me without proof, and you have the right to detain me in the middle of the airport." The other person quickly said, "This is federal regulation. We are just doing our duty." Zoe opened her laptop, her fingers shaking as she typed in the password. She opened the presentation folder, and the slides appeared just graphs, illustrations, and notes, nothing but harmless text. She turned the screen toward them. "That's all. If you want to copy or inspect anything, I'll let you, but I demand to be told why." The 2 employees exchanged glances. Then one of them walked out. The room fell silent again. The clock on the wall was as steady as the slow beat of someone's heart. Zoe leaned back in her chair. Everything was spinning in her head. Richard, his eyes, the words people who don't know their place. Then the brunette, her glance as if she were weighing something. She recalled years ago, when she was a young engineer at a large technology corporation. A project she was working on was taken by her superiors, and when she objected, they said, "Don't make people uncomfortable." Zoe, she chose to stay silent, for fear of losing her position. From that day on, she vowed never to let others define her worth. The door opened, and the security guard returned with a woman in a gray suit whose name tag read Supervisor. She said, "Ms. Harper, we apologize for the inconvenience. The report came from a passenger in the same cabin who said you were filming an engineering documentary. But after reviewing the camera footage, we found no clear evidence." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Can I leave then?" "Yes. But we need to keep your computer for a few hours to check further. You can wait or authorize a representative." Zoe was silent. She knew every minute that passed would delay her flight and her meeting for tomorrow's presentation. But if she let them keep her laptop, they would have access to all her research. That was more dangerous than being held. "No," she said firmly. "I'll stay here." The supervisor's voice was somewhat surprised. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I have time. And I have the right to see everything that comes with my job." Moments later, 2 airport IT technicians were called in. They opened the device, copied the data, and Zoe recorded every action on her phone. When the process was complete, the supervisor said softly, "Thank you for your cooperation. This matter is a bit sensitive. Perhaps you understand." Zoe looked straight at him. "I understand, but I also understand something else if I were a white man. Things might be asked differently." The supervisor did not reply, just bowed her head in apology and left the room. Zoe sat alone, clutching a plastic cup of water. Drops of water dripped down her cold hands. Outside the window, planes were still lining up on the runway. She looked out and wondered if her flight was still waiting. The phone rang. It was from Elena Morales, a close friend and lawyer. "Heard you were detained. I'm on my way. Don't sign anything without me." Zoe closed her eyes and took a deep breath. A small amount of relief crept into the storm inside her. About 20 minutes later, the door opened. Elena walked in, petite, her face serious and warm. "Oh my God. Zoe, are you making trouble at the airport again?" Zoe chuckled. "It wasn't me. Someone wanted me in trouble." Elena put down her bag and glanced at the file on the table. "I saw the report. The whistleblower was a passenger named Clara Weston. She filed a warning through the internal security app. Coincidentally, Clara's on contract for Omnitech." Zoe froze. "Omnitech? My direct competitor." "Exactly." "And do you know who the CFO of Omnitech is?" Elena asked quietly, her eyes lighting up. Zoe nodded. "Richard Bowen." The two looked at each other. No more words needed. Everything started to click together. Elena opened her laptop and quickly typed a few lines. "I'll send a request to access the cabin cameras. If they dare to slander me, I'll make the company apologize publicly." Zoe pursed her lips. "I don't want just an apology. I want the truth." There was a brief knock on the door, and Megan entered, holding Zoe's suitcase. The young woman's face was filled with concern. "Miss Harper, I brought your luggage, and I'm sorry. I know you did nothing wrong. I saw it all from the beginning." Zoe looked at her, smiling gratefully. "It's okay. Megan, thank you." As Megan left, Elena said softly, "You know, people like Megan, they see more than we think. But most of them choose to stay silent," Zoe replied, her voice low. "Because it's easier. I used to stay silent, too." Elena put her hand on your shoulder. "Not this time. This time. We'll talk." The door opened, and security announced Zoe was free to leave. The laptop was returned, and they apologized mechanically. Zoe said nothing. All she asked was, "Is my flight ready yet? It's been delayed. The captain asked to wait for you." Elena chuckled. At least someone is reasonable. Zoe walked out into the long hallway, the afternoon light streaming through the large windows. People were moving about as usual, unaware that an undercurrent had just passed beneath the calm. She stopped at the window and looked down at the runway. A plane was turning, its wings reflecting the sunlight. Zoe stared for a long time. It was no longer anger. It was determination. A deep sense that something bigger than herself was at play, and she had to face it. She turned to Elena. "Let's go. I can't let my flight be hijacked, nor can I let the team's efforts be stolen." Elena nodded. "And I will be there, right next to you." The two of them walked quickly towards the departure gate. On the way, Zoe saw the image of the brown-haired woman, Clara, standing at the cafe counter, talking on the phone. Their eyes met for a moment. Clara was startled and quickly turned away. Zoe smiled slightly, not because she was happy, but because she understood. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. When Zoe and Elena returned to the gate, the waiting area was almost empty. An airline employee hurried over and recognized them. "Miss Harper, Miss Morales, your flight is about to depart again. The captain asked to wait for enough passengers, not to leave without you." Zoe nodded, grateful. She knew it wasn't normal procedure. Maybe someone in the crew understood. They walked across the gangway without speaking. The doors opened, and the air inside was still stuffy. Several passengers looked at her, some curious, some concerned. Zoe kept her composure and walked back to her seat. Her laptop was still in its place. Megan, the young flight attendant, smiled softly. "Welcome back, Ms. Harper." Her voice, though small, warmed Zoe's heart. She sat down and buckled her seatbelt, but she didn't feel safe. In the third row, Richard Bowen was still sitting there. He glanced at her briefly and then looked away, as if nothing had happened. The look made her shiver. Not because she was afraid, but because she knew there was something suspicious behind that calm. Captain Miles Jefferson stepped out of the cockpit. He walked across the cabin and stopped in front of Zoe. He was a tall man in his 50s, with a deep but bright gaze. "Miss Harper, I have been briefed on the situation. I am sorry for what you have experienced. We will make sure the flight goes smoothly." Zoe stood up and shook his hand. "Thank you, Captain Jefferson. I understand you were only doing your duty." He chuckled. "No, you misunderstand. I did it out of respect for justice, and because I know what it feels like." Their eyes met. In that moment, Zoe understood what he meant. They were both people who had traveled a longer road to get where they deserved to be. When the captain left, she sat back down, feeling a little relieved. But less than 10 minutes later, something else happened. In row 2, a brunette woman, Clara Weston, sat up, looking flustered. She made small talk with the flight attendant, pointed at Zoe, then bent down to retrieve her phone. Zoe caught a glimpse of her hiding her phone in her coat pocket. Her instincts told her something was wrong. Megan approached and asked softly, "Miss Weston, is there a problem?" Clara smiled wryly. "No, just a weak signal. I was sending a work email." Megan nodded and turned away, but Zoe couldn't tear her eyes away. She could clearly see the Atlas presentation reflected on the other phone screen. Clara had taken a few snapshots of the slides when Zoe turned on her phone. Zoe took a deep breath. A dozen options raced through her mind. Should she speak up or stay quiet and collect evidence? She chose the latter. She turned on the video recording on her phone, placed it in the slot of the table, and recorded Clara's every move. The loudspeaker blared, and the plane began to taxi. Captain Jefferson announced, "We are about to take off. Please turn off your electronic devices." Clara hung up the phone, smiling falsely, as if she had done nothing wrong. Richard Bowen sat still, but Zoe saw him tilt his head back, glancing meaningfully at Clara. As the plane steadied, the flight attendants served drinks. Everything seemed normal, but Zoe knew the silence was temporary, like calm water before a strong wind. She opened the small notebook and wrote a few lines. "If anything happens, remember I saw, and I know." The writing was shaky, but clear. Megan approached and asked softly, "Are you okay, Ms. Harper?" Zoe smiled and nodded. "Fine. Just thinking about my presentation tomorrow," Megan said softly. "I thought the woman in the second row was a little strange. She asked me about the Wi-Fi connection, but the plane didn't have internet on." Zoe looked at her. "Thanks. Just keep an eye out for me." Megan nodded, her eyes filled with determination. About an hour later, Captain Jefferson announced that the plane would be temporarily descending due to an unstable radar signal. The engine noise changed, and the passengers fell silent. Zoe gripped the armrest. In the dim light, she saw Clara smile slightly, pull out her phone, and send a text message. Just then, a small security alarm went off. The captain signaled the crew to hold their positions. The plane stopped climbing. Mr. Jefferson stepped out of the cockpit, his face serious. "There's a problem with the communication system. I need to check some equipment." He walked across the row of chairs and stopped near Clara. "Please turn off your phone." Clara, startled, quickly hung up. I was just texting my daughter. We'll check the signal. It seems your device is causing interference." His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. Clara blushed and quickly placed the phone on the tray. Megan walked over and took it, gently but firmly. Zoe watched the scene, a strange feeling stirring in her heart. She turned to the window. The light outside was flickering. The ground was fading away. In that moment, she realized something. Sometimes the truth is not who was loudest, but who was patient enough to wait for the mask to fall. 2 hours later, Captain Jefferson returned to announce the plane was making an emergency landing in Denver for inspection. Passengers gasped. Some complained, but Zoe remained silent. She knew this was a turning point. As soon as the plane touched down, airport security boarded. The captain spoke to them briefly, then turned to Zoe. "Miss Harper, I need you to stay. Miss Weston, please take your luggage down." Clara turned pale. Richard Bowen stood up and protested. "This is nonsense. She did nothing wrong." The captain coldly replied, "This is safety procedure. Please sit down." Zoe watched everything, a flood of questions forming in her mind. How did Mr. Jefferson know to keep Clara? Had he been watching all along as Clara was ushered down? Zoe caught Mr. Jefferson's eye. He nodded. There was understanding in his gaze and a silent assurance that things were getting better. Zoe sat still, taking a deep breath. She knew the real storm hadn't begun yet, but at least now she wasn't alone. The plane was stationary on the runway. Security cars flashed red and blue lights outside the windows. People were whispering inside the cabin. But to Zoe, all the noise seemed to fade away. In her head, all she could think was, "They think I'm just a passenger, but I'm the one who saw them." She opened her phone and reviewed the video she had recorded when Clara took the screenshot. The evidence was clear. She saved it to her cloud drive and sent a copy to Elena with a message, "I have this. Prepare for the next step." Elena responded almost immediately, "Hold on. I'll call the captain. Everything is on track." Zoe leaned her head back in the chair. For the first time in hours, she felt like she could breathe. Though everything was still hazy, she knew she had made the right choice not to stay silent, not to bow her head. The plane has yet to take off again. But for Zoe, another journey has begun. A journey to reclaim the truth and her rightful place in a world that is not easy to accept people like her. Denver, 5 p.m. The late afternoon sun streamed through the airport windows, casting a warm yellow glow across the cold tile. Zoe sat in the private waiting room the airline had set up. She looked out at the runway, where the plane that had just landed was still surrounded by a technical team. Everything seemed quiet, but she knew it was a false quiet, the quiet of a wave waiting to break the shore. Elena stood beside him, talking on the phone. Her voice was clear and decisive. "I need a copy of the CCTV from first class on Flight 247, and I need it within the hour, no later." She paused, listened for a few seconds, then nodded. "Thank you. I'll send the authorization right away." Zoe smiled slightly. "You're as sharp as ever." Elena sat down and took off her glasses. "Survival is about being sharp." "Zoe, how about you? Are you okay?" Zoe looked at the coffee in front of her. The steam rose and dissipated quickly in the air. "Fine is a relative term. I'm not scared, just tired. Every time I think I've gone far enough to escape prejudice, the world reminds me that I haven't." Elena was silent for a moment, then said softly, "You don't need to prove yourself to them. Zoe, you just need to protect what is yours." Zoe looked up, her eyes bright, but also weary, like someone who has been fighting for too long. "I know, but sometimes I wonder if I'm missing something else by having to prove it all the time." Elena didn't answer. They both looked out the window. The western sky was getting darker, and outside, the technical team was cleaning the inspection area. An employee approached and announced that the flight would continue in an hour. When they boarded again, Zoe noticed Clara was no longer on the passenger list. Richard Bowen was still there, but he seemed quieter than usual. His eyes glanced at her briefly, calculatingly. Megan greeted them with a wry smile. "Welcome back. Captain Jefferson wants to see you before departure." Zoe followed Megan to the cockpit. Inside, Captain Jefferson was reviewing the engineering report. He looked up, his expression calm. "We just finished our check. There were no real mechanical problems. But there is one other thing I think you should know." He slid a small envelope toward her. Inside was a printout of a security camera image Clara taking a screenshot of Zoe's laptop screen. In the second frame, Richard stood behind her, leaning slightly, as if gesturing. Zoe stared at the photograph for a long time. She wasn't surprised, but she felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because her prediction had been correct. Relief because the truth was finally starting to take shape. "Did you keep the original?" she asked. "Sent it to airport security and the FBI? They will be investigating Omnitech. I also sent a copy to the airline, so they know who really delayed this flight." Zoe nodded slightly. "Thank you, Captain. You have no idea how much this means to me." Jefferson smiled slightly. "I know. Ms. Harper, I was in your shoes. When people don't believe, a little evidence can change everything. But you need to be prepared. Things will get even more noisy after today." Zoe exhaled. "I'm used to the noise. But this time, I want it to be for something better." When she returned to her seat, Elena was scrolling through the news. "Zoe, you should see this. On the phone screen." A post was going viral on social media. Flight delayed because female passengers suspected of secretly taking photos of company data. There was no name, but a blurry image of Zoe in the first-class seat was captured. Under the comments, familiar lines appeared. Another person playing the victim. She must have done something wrong to be detained. Judging by the way she dressed, she must not be an ordinary person. Zoe felt her chest tighten. She was familiar with those words, but every time she read them, they still hurt as much as the first time. Elena put a hand on her shoulder. "Stop reading. You know the internet." "No, I need to read. I need to know how the world is looking at me, to know how to say it back." Elena sighed. "Just don't let them define you." Zoe nodded, smiling slightly. "I won't let them define me. I'll let the facts do it." The intercom blared, announcing that the flight was about to take off again. Passengers returned to their seats, seatbelts fastened. Captain Jefferson made a brief announcement, his voice deep and steady. "We will be flying to San Francisco shortly. Thank you for your patience. Sometimes the most memorable trips are not about the destination, but about what you went through to get there." A few people chuckled. Zoe looked out the window. Denver receded into the distance, the streetlights blurring into long streaks of light. She took a deep breath, feeling her heart calm. About an hour later, when everyone was asleep, Zoe took out her phone and reviewed the video she had shot on the previous flight. The image was clear, Clara holding the phone, the lens pointed at her laptop screen. In the background, Richard tilted his head slightly, gesturing. Zoe slowed down the video, each frame becoming clear. There was no denying it. She sent the video to Elena, with the message, "This is official proof." Elena replied immediately, "Good. I will hand it over to the FBI tomorrow morning. They will have no way out." Zoe gently closed the phone and leaned her head against the window. In the darkness, she saw her reflection, tired, but not broken. She suddenly realized that perhaps strength lies not in winning, but in remaining calm in the midst of the storm. The captain's voice rang out from the cockpit, warm and steady. "We're flying over the Rockies. There might be some turbulence, but don't worry. We'll keep it steady." Zoe looked out. Thick clouds covered the plane's wings. Beneath them lay a world she knew she would have to return to and face. But this time, she was no longer passive. She had evidence, allies, and most of all, faith. As the plane stabilized, she heard someone in the back row whisper, "It's a good thing she's here. I don't know what's going on, but looking at her, I feel safe." Zoe turned. An older woman smiled at her. The small nod was a silent acknowledgement, but it was enough to warm her heart. In that moment, Zoe understood that what she was doing wasn't just to save her job, but also so that other people like her, could get on a plane, sit in their seats, and not have to apologize for being there. She closed her eyes, letting her breathing steadied with the sound of the engine. Up ahead, the sky opened up. The sudden sound of a warning siren pierced the silence in the first-class cabin. A yellow light flashed on the ceiling, startling the passengers. Captain Miles Jefferson's voice rang out, calm but urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just received a signal from the control tower. Please remain seated and fasten your seat belts. The aircraft will be stopping at its current altitude to resolve a technical issue." The cabin was buzzing. People whispered. Chairs creaked as passengers turned to each other to ask what was going on. Zoe opened her eyes and looked around. Her first glance fell on Richard Bowen. He was still sitting, but his shoulders were tense, his hands clenched into fists. Zoe felt a surge of unease. Megan walked quickly down the aisle, checking her seatbelt, her voice soft but firm. "Please remain calm. This is a safety procedure." As she passed Zoe, she stopped and bowed slightly. "The captain would like to see you in the rear cabin, if that's okay with you." Zoe nodded, untying the straps. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the feeling that everything was about to change. In the rear cabin, Captain Jefferson was talking to two technicians on the radio. When he saw Zoe, he motioned for her to come in. "Thank you for coming. I want you to know. We just received a call from the control tower. They said there was a new allegation that a passenger named Zoe Harper might be involved in an internal data breach at a technology company." Zoe paused. "What?" Her voice was low, but her eyes flashed with anger. "Which corporation? Omnitech Technologies," Jefferson said slowly. "They sent a verification request directly to the airline. The reason is that they suspect you are carrying sensitive data related to a new AI product." Zoe laughed, a mirthless laugh. "They're trying to set me up." Jefferson nodded. "I think so. But the regulations required us to pause for inspection. However, I had the right to request an independent investigation. I did. Do you trust me?" He looked at her, his eyes firm. "I don't need to believe it. I saw it. I saw you stay calm, cooperate, not hide. People who are at fault don't behave like that. And more than anything, I've seen Omnitech play this game before." Zoe was silent. Outside, the engine slowed down. The wind whistled softly through the fuselage. In that moment, she realized not only was her job at stake, but the reputation of the people behind Novalink, the group of young engineers who trusted her, could also be jeopardized if things were misinterpreted. "Do you have any proof that they were following you?" Jefferson asked. Zoe took out her phone and pulled up the video of Clara taking the slideshow. "I have this. And Captain, I think they don't just want the data. They want to destroy me. They want to make me a cautionary tale for any black woman who dares to stand up to them." Jefferson sighed. "I understand better than you think, but you are not alone. I will hold the plane on hold until we can contact federal security. Do not move from your seat." Zoe nodded. "Thank you. I'm not giving up." Back in the passenger compartment, the atmosphere was tense. A few people started complaining. A man in row 5 shouted, "What's going on? Why is it stopping in midair?" a woman whispered. "I heard someone is under investigation. It must be her again." Zoe heard everything, but didn't turn around. She knew that silence was the best way to maintain her composure. Megan walked past, placing a hand on her shoulder, a wordless comfort. She opened her laptop, switched it to offline mode, and reviewed all the data. Everything was intact. But she noticed something strange. A file called Atlas Janky Proto V3 had been accessed just an hour ago, while she had been called to the rear compartment. She looked at Richard. He was closing his laptop, his expression eerily calm. Zoe knew he had done it. She tapped a note on her phone. "Richard accessed files while I was away." Elena texted just in time. "Zoe, the FBI has confirmed that Omnitech hired Clara for a parallel project. They are investigating. Try to preserve all evidence. Don't delete anything." She replied quickly, "I understand. There may be someone else involved." Captain Jefferson announced over the loudspeaker, "We will be descending to safety and awaiting further instructions. Please remain calm. Passengers." Zoe felt the plane tilt slightly, and her stomach tightened. Everyone fell silent. Richard remained seated, but Zoe saw him furtively slide his hand to his phone. She knew that if she didn't act now, all the evidence could disappear. Zoe jumped up, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Bowen, did you just access my data?" Everyone turned to look. Richard chuckled. "What are you talking about? Who do you think you are?" She didn't let him continue. "I'm the one who's going to make you explain everything you've done to the FBI." The air seemed to freeze. Several passengers looked at each other. Megan approached. "What's the matter?" Miss Harper's Zoe held out her phone, the screen showing the access log. "Keep this. If anyone tries to shut down the network, report it." Richard jumped up, about to speak loudly, but Captain Jefferson stepped out of the cockpit. His voice was deep and strong. "Mr. Bowen, please sit down. I have contacted the Aviation Security Agency. When we land, they will work directly with you." Richard was silent, his face pale, but his eyes still flashed with hatred. Zoe sat back, her hands clasped together. Anger and hurt merged inside her. She was no longer just a data defender, but a defender of the honor of an entire community of despised people. The plane began to descend slowly. Outside the window, the sky turned a pale gray. Zoe looked down and saw the distant city lights as dim dots. Everything was strangely quiet. Elna sent another message. "Zoe, the media is starting to talk about it. Don't say anything now. We'll make a statement when we land. Let the facts speak for themselves." She closed the phone and leaned her head back on the chair. A tear fell, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. Tired of the repeated battles, the looks, the rumors, the doubted efforts. But then she smiled. In the cabin, the captain's voice rang out again, deep as a guide in a storm. "Everything will be clear soon. Sometimes, justice is only delayed, but never lost." Zoe closed her eyes, letting the sound drift her mind. She knew that no matter how long the plane stopped, the truth would begin to rise. As the plane made an emergency landing in Denver, the doors opened and a cold wind rushed into the cabin. A group of security personnel and 2 agents in black suits boarded. The air in the cabin was heavy, as if someone had turned off all the oxygen. The passengers sat still. No one spoke, only the sound of heels on the floor. Zoe sat in the front row, silent. When the agents approached, she stood before they could call her name. "I'm Zoe Harper. I understand what you're here for. I'm willing to cooperate." Her voice was calm, but her eyes held determination. The tall agent nodded. "We just need you to follow us to our office at the airport to clarify some information." Megan stood by and said softly, "Miss Harper, you don't have to go alone." "I can." Zoe smiled, shaking her head. "It's okay." "Megan, I'm used to going into cold rooms alone." As she walked down the narrow aisle, a few people bent down, pretending to search their pockets. One man avoided her gaze, and the woman sitting next to her gently withdrew her hand from her husband's, as if afraid of getting involved. Everyone was silent. A familiar silence, the kind she had heard so many times in conference rooms, in negotiations where people only dared to look at her and then turn away. Elena followed. She had contacted the local district attorney's office. "They have no right to detain you without a warrant. I'll make sure they understand that." The investigation room was downstairs, its white light shining so brightly that Zoe had to squint. An agent ushered her into a chair. "Ms. Harper, we've received a complaint from Omnitech Technologies. They claim that the data breach may be related to you." Zoe looked straight at him. "They accuse without proof." "I do." Elena handed over the USB containing the secret video footage Clara took. "This is proof to the contrary. If you really seek justice, start here." The agent took it, looked it over, and exchanged a glance with his colleague. They left the room for a few minutes. Meanwhile, Zoe sat silently, staring at the white wall in front of her. With each passing second, she could hear the ticking of the clock, the opening and closing of doors in the hallway, and her own voice, a mixture of anger and a deep weariness. Elena put a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Zoe nodded slightly, her eyes distant. "I'm fine. It's strange. Elena, every time I think I've overcome prejudice, the world reminds me that, to them, I'm still the one who has to prove my innocence before they believe me." Elena was silent. She knew there were no words that could ease the bitterness. About 10 minutes later, 2 agents returned. One said, "Ms. Harper, we have reviewed the video. It shows another passenger, Clara Weston, taking screenshots of you. She is currently being held for questioning." Zoe took a deep breath. "Thanks. Guys, I just want to clear things up," the other agent continued. "We have also been notified by the airline that there may have been unauthorized access to your data. We will be confiscating Richard Bowen's device for examination." Elena smiled slightly. "Well, at least justice is starting to move. They were allowed to leave after signing some papers." When Zoe got out, she saw Megan waiting in the hallway, her eyes red. "Ms. Harper, they said the flight was canceled. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry I didn't do more." Zoe looked at her, her voice gentle. "You have done enough. Thank you for standing by my side." Megan nodded slightly, her eyes welling up with tears. "I just hope that one day, people like you won't have to endure this anymore." Zoe smiled. "That day will come, but to get there, we have to start with people who dare to say, 'I believe her.'" They parted in silence. Elena and Zoe left the airport in a private car. As the car rolled down the highway toward downtown, Zoe looked out the window. The night sky was heavy, the stars hidden behind gray clouds. She suddenly remembered her early days, working in a small apartment in Brooklyn. Back then, it had been just her and 3 friends, people who believed in her not because of her fame, but because of her ideals. She said softly, as if to herself, I promise to see them through to the end, no matter what storms come. Elena listened, smiling slightly, and you will. But this time, we won't just defend ourselves. We'll strike back. Zoe turned back, her eyes shining. Counterattack. Yes, they made a mistake in thinking you would stay silent. We have evidence. We have witnesses. And now we have the media. If they intend to smear you, let the light do its work. Zoe was silent for a moment, then said, Elena, do you remember the first day I walked into the tech conference? Someone mistook me for a waiter. Today, it's no different. Elena smiled slightly. It's different. That day you were silent. Today, you're fighting. The car turned into the downtown area. Outside, the streetlights were shining, and people were bustling about as if nothing had happened. Zoe looked at the scene and felt a hollowness spread inside her. She knew the real battle had only just begun. But at least she had regained the most important thing, her belief in herself. When they arrived at the hotel, Zoe's phone rang. It was from Captain Miles Jefferson, flight permanently canceled. Clara is in custody. I trust you to prove the truth. Thanks for holding on. Zoe finished reading, gave a small smile. She texted back, It's not just me. Thank you for believing. That night, she did not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the city lights reflected on the glass. Each little light was like a story, a person trying to keep himself steady in the storm. In her head, her father's voice echoed, deep and warm, as if from a faraway place. Daughter, there are battles not to win, but to let future generations know that the path can be passed. She smiled slightly. Perhaps that was the reason why she was still sitting here. Still getting up after being pushed down, because if she did not continue, who would pave the way for those who came after her? Outside. A light rain began to fall, small drops tapping against the window frame. Zoe closed her eyes, letting the sound lull her into a rare sense of peace. Tomorrow, she knew, would be another long day with the media, with the public, with endless questions. But tonight, at least, she allowed herself some peace, quiet, but not let go. The next morning, Zoe woke to the sound of her phone ringing. She looked at the clock. It was only 6 a.m. Dozens of text messages and missed calls flashed across the screen. A few keywords stood out, making her gasp. Breaking news. CEO suspected of spying. Flight delayed due to data leak. Elena opened the door and walked in, laptop in hand. Zoe, the media is on fire. The news is spreading nationwide. She set the phone down on the table. On the screen was a front-page headline from the New York Bulletin, Black CEO suspected of mid-flight data stealing. Below was a photo of Zoe standing at the airport gate, her eyes calm, but cropped at an angle that made her look like she was being escorted. Zoe looked at the screen, her fingers trembling slightly. They always know how to choose the right angle to make a black woman look like a criminal. Elena sat down, her voice firm. Don't let them define you. We will fight back. Zoe was silent for a few seconds and then asked, how to counterattack. We're going to hold a press conference. but not one that defends itself. You're going to speak the truth, in the style of a leader. You're not just defending yourself, you're defending others who are being looked at with prejudice. Zoe looked out the window. In the distance, the dawn was turning the buildings gold. In that moment, she remembered what her father had said. When you go on stage, don't show them your fear. Show them why you're there. She took a deep breath. Okay, but I want to control the story from the start. No excuses. I'll tell the truth. That afternoon, a video surfaced on social media. It was a recording from a passenger sitting near Zoe, of Clara Weston taking a screenshot of her laptop. The video went viral. Hundreds of comments began to flow. She speaks the truth. Look at how she's being treated. It's the same old blaming of successful black women. Elena breathed a sigh of relief. The public is turning around to support you, but you have to take advantage of this moment. Zoe nodded. I know. Prepare your speech for this afternoon. The press conference was held in the grand lobby of the Denver Grand Hotel. Dozens of reporters crowded in. Flashlights flashed as Zoe stepped onto the podium. She wore a dark blue suit, her hair neatly tied up, her posture straight, but her eyes soft. She opened with a pause. Then, slowly and clearly, I'm Zoe Harper, CEO of Novalink Systems. Yesterday, I was falsely accused because someone took a photo of my documents on an airplane. I'm not saying this to complain, but to ask a question why. When a black woman is successful, is it easier to believe she's dishonest than talented? The room fell silent. Cameras stopped flashing. Zoe continued, I've worked 20 years to get here. I've been in meetings where people thought I was an assistant. I've heard people say, you're just a special case. But today, I tell them I'm not a special case. I'm the result of talent, of hard work, of unwavering faith. She paused, her gaze fixed on the row of reporters. Novalink doesn't steal. We create, and we will continue to create value that makes the fearful tremble. Below. Elena stood watching, proud and moved. The speech ended in applause. A few reporters came forward to ask questions. Ms. Harper, do you have evidence of data being captured? Zoe smiled and nodded at Elena. She projected the video onto the screen behind her. The image was clear, undeniable. This is the truth, and I trust justice will tell the rest. The press conference ended, but the ripple effect was strong. Online, the hashtag #StandWithZoe began to spread. Thousands of women shared their stories of being doubted, belittled, and disenfranchised simply because they didn't fit the model others wanted to see. That night, Zoe and Elena returned to their room. The phone rang nonstop text messages from colleagues, investors, even strangers sending words of support. One read, "Thank you for saying what we've been silent about for so long." Elena looked at Zoe, smiling slightly. "You just became an icon." Did you know that Zoe shook her head, her eyes distant? "I don't want to be an icon. I just want to be normal like everyone else. Go to work, fly where I need to go, sit in the seat I bought, without anyone questioning the color of my skin." Elena was silent, then said softly, "Maybe it's because you don't want it, that you deserve it." As night fell, Zoe stepped out onto the balcony. Denver was sparkling with lights. She opened her phone and saw an email from Captain Miles Jefferson. "I have sent a statement confirming that Clara Weston took the screenshots and that Mr. Bowen was acting suspiciously." "I am proud to have flown with you," Zoe replied. "Thank you. You have helped me believe that justice still exists." She gently raised her head to look at the sky. The night wind carried a bit of chill, but in her heart was a strange warmth, the warmth of the truth slowly being revealed. She turned back and opened her laptop. A notification popped up: emergency meeting between the FBI and Omnitech representatives. She knew tomorrow would be the next step in the battle, but unlike before, this time she was not alone. She said softly to herself, her voice filled with certainty. If they want to fight with rumors, I will fight with light. The next morning, Zoe woke up in a room bathed in pale sunlight. Before she could touch her coffee, her phone rang. It was Elena. Breaking news. Zoe, the FBI has opened an official investigation into Omnitech, but Richard Bowen has remained silent, not showing up. Rumor has it he's planning a counterattack press conference. Zoe frowned slightly. Of course. He'll try to spin the story, make himself the victim. Elena replied, We need to go first. There's someone who wants to see you. A reporter from the Chronicle. She says she has internal Omnitech documents that show they've been monitoring Novalink for months. Zoe stood up, her eyes sharpening. Good. It's about time the truth spoke for itself. They met at a small coffee shop near downtown Denver. The reporter was a petite Asian woman with sharp eyes. She introduced herself. My name is Vivian Tran. I have been following Omnitech for a long time. I have evidence that they hired a group of cybersecurity consultants to hack into the Novalink system. Clara's just the last link. Zoe listened silently, each word seeming to piece together the picture she had been suspecting. Vivian opened her laptop and pulled up a series of internal emails. In one, Richard wrote to the engineering team, Let's make sure that when the data arrives in flight, we can access it remotely without being detected. Zoe clenched her fists. I guessed, but I didn't think they'd be this reckless. Vivian nodded. They thought you would never speak out. But you made it iconic. Now they're scared, so they want to fight back. Elena leaned forward. Are you willing to release these documents? Vivian looked at the two of them, her eyes steady. I will only do it if Miss Harper will allow me to tell the story as it is. No embellishment, no drama, just the truth. Zoe smiled. If truth is a weapon, let it be used properly. That afternoon, Omnitech held a press conference. Richard Bowen appeared, in a gray suit, his eyes confident. We deny all allegations. Clara Weston acted alone. As for Ms. Harper, she is trying to use the race issue to cover up her failure. The conference room erupted. A reporter asked, Do you have any evidence for that? Richard replied without hesitation. We are providing the data to the authorities. At the same time, Vivian Tran's article was posted on the Chronicle's homepage with the title, Omnitech, the Hunter in the Dark Evidence, shows that the technology corporation intentionally infiltrated Novalink. The story spread like wildfire. Internal emails, meeting transcripts, even conversations between Richard and the engineering team, all were made public. Under each paragraph was a caption, Independently verified source. FBI confirms investigation. Social media exploded. The hashtag, Hard Justice for Zoe, was all over the place. Many investors announced their withdrawal from Omnitech. Some of their former employees also spoke up to confirm that they had been forced to conceal their surveillance of Novalink at the hotel. Zoe sat watching the news stream roll across the screen. Her heart filled with mixed emotions, not joy, not gloating, but a deep silence. Elena came over and said softly, You won. Zoe shook her head slightly. No, Elena, we're not winning. We're just making the truth visible. The phone rang. It was Captain Miles Jefferson. Miss Harper, I just saw the news. I just wanted to say that you did what many people wouldn't. Thank you for standing up." Zoe chuckled. "No, Captain, I only stood up because if I didn't, someone else would have to take the blame for me." When the call ended, Zoe looked out the window. Denver was dark, but the buildings in the distance were still brightly lit. The light reminded her that darkness could not hide forever. Suddenly, Elena put the phone down on the table, her face changing color. "Zoe, Omnitech is filing a countersuit against you, accusing you of trade secret infringement. They are trying to drag this out to distract you." Zoe was calm. "I guess they will, but this time, I'm ready." She opened her laptop and accessed the secure folder. It contained all the evidence, all the recordings, and the emails confirming their previous threats. "Elena, send it all to the FBI and prepare a counterclaim. I want them to understand that black women don't just defend, we fight back." Elena nodded, her eyes lighting up. "You are the Zoe Harper I know." They worked relentlessly all night. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, mingling with the steady sound of keyboards. In the middle of the night, Zoe looked up and looked out the fogged window. In her reflection, she saw herself no longer the accused woman, but the one rewriting the story. She said softly, as if to herself, "I am no longer running away. They can try to bring me down, but they can't take away my faith." The next morning, as the first light streamed through the window, Elena handed her the new newspaper. The front page had a photo of Zoe at yesterday's press conference. Under the headline, "The Woman Who Made the Tech Industry Look at Herself," Zoe finished reading and was silent for a long time. "I don't want them to remember me as a symbol. I just want them to remember one thing, that I wasn't silent." Elena laughed, her voice light as the wind. "And because you didn't stay silent, you changed the world." "Zoe." Zoe looked outside. The sky was unusually clear after the night's rain. Perhaps it was a sign of a new beginning, not just for her, but for everyone who had been forced to sit in the wrong seat on their own journey. 3 days after Richard Bowen's press conference, the tech world exploded. News of the Omnitech scandal was all over television, social media, and major newspapers ran headlines revolving around Zoe Harper, the woman who had shaken a giant corporation. In a closed conference room at FBI headquarters in Denver, Zoe and Elena sat across from 3 federal investigators. The air in the room was thick, except for the steady scribbling of pens. Video evidence from the flight was shown on a large screen. Clara Weston took a screenshot. Richard Bowen tilted his head. It was all so clear. The chief investigator looked at Zoe. "Ms. Harper, we confirm that you are completely innocent. Furthermore, based on what we have gathered, there is reason to believe that Omnitech violated confidentiality laws and the fair competition law." Elena let out a small sigh of relief. Zoe just nodded slightly. "I don't want them destroyed. I just want justice to be seen. Justice will be done," the investigator replied, "and we hope you are willing to be a key witness in this case." Zoe nodded, her gaze steady. "If it helps others not have to suffer the same thing, I will do it." The meeting lasted almost 3 hours. When Zoe emerged, she took a deep breath. The sunlight fell on her face, warm and gentle. Elena walked beside her, whispering, "You've just come out of a storm." "Zoe, but I think this peace is temporary." Zoe smiled faintly. "You know, Elena, peace is never what I look for. I just hope I am strong enough not to collapse when the storm comes again." That evening, she returned to the hotel. Vivian Tran was waiting in the lobby. "I just got an insider tip Omnitech's board is in an emergency meeting. They could fire Richard Bowen overnight. Zoe raised an eyebrow. Faster than I thought. Vivian smiled. When the truth is big enough, it doesn't need anyone to push it. It rolls on its own. That made Zoe smile. But the smile quickly faded as Vivian opened her laptop. There's one more thing. Zoe, I think you should see. On the screen was a short video leaked from within Omnitech. Richard Bowen was angrily pounding the table in the conference room. I'm not afraid of that woman. Let's see who dares to invest in her company after this. That statement only lasted a few seconds. But when Vivian uploaded a new post, it became the trigger. The internet exploded. Millions of shares. Hundreds of posts in support of Zoe. People who had doubted her now came to her defense. One tweet went viral. She didn't fight for herself. She fought for everyone who was looked down upon because they were different. Zoe sat silently staring at the screen, her heart filled with emotion. Not because she had won, but because she knew the truth had finally found its way out. The next day, she got a call from Miles Jefferson. Ms. Harper, the airline has just implemented a new training program for employees, based on your incident about recognizing bias and respecting customers. I thought you should know that. Zoe smiled through the phone. Thank you, Captain. That's the best news I've heard today. Jefferson chuckled. You didn't just bring a corporation to its knees. You changed an industry. Not many people can do that. Zoe paused. I don't want them to bow their heads. I just want them to look back. In the afternoon, Zoe was invited to a press conference at a tech conference in Chicago, where she had originally planned to introduce the Atlas AI project. This time, no one doubted her. She stepped onto the stage, the spotlight shining on her face. Below her were thousands of people, engineers, students, investors, reporters. When the applause died down, Zoe said 2 weeks ago, I was just another person on a business trip. Hours later, I was the subject of hundreds of headlines, questioned simply because I dared to sit in a seat where many thought I didn't belong. But today, I'm not here to recount what happened, but to tell you one thing sometimes. Your seat is where others try to push you out. The room fell silent. She continued, her voice deep and warm. Technology is the future, but the future cannot be built on fear, on prejudice, or on closed doors. We can only truly progress when we dare to open our hearts, dare to believe in each other's abilities, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from. Elna sat in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. Vivian was taking notes on her speech, knowing this would be a moment that would go down in technological history. Zoe ended with a line that sent the entire auditorium into applause. If someone tells you that you don't belong here, smile and reply, I bought a ticket, and this place is marked with my name. The applause was thunderous and continued. A few people stood, including Miles Jefferson, who had been invited as guest of honor. He placed his hand over his heart and nodded to Zoe. She returned his warm smile. After the ceremony, Zoe emerged from the hall, the sunset lighting her face. Elena approached and whispered, You know, today you are not just a CEO. You are the voice of a generation. Zoe looked at her, smiling slightly. I don't want to be a voice. I just want to be proof that that voice can be heard. They both sat in silence, watching the sun set behind the glass buildings. An end, but also a beginning. That night, back in her room, Zoe opened her computer and wrote the first note for her new project Horizon program, a training and mentoring program for women of color in STEM. She lingered, then sat watching the moonlight fall on the table. In the soft light, she realized This war was not just about work, but the journey of marginalized people to find a place. And she knew. The journey was still long, but she was ready. Zoe smiled slightly. In the end, she whispered, as if to herself, that chair isn't just mine. It belongs to anyone who dares to sit there, even if no one wants them there. The night wind blew gently through the window. One chapter had closed, but Zoe Harper's story had just begun. A page of freedom, justice, and belief in herself. 3 days after the Chicago conference, Zoe returned to New York. The city was still bustling and vibrant, as if it had never known the storm she had just experienced. But for Zoe, everything was different. No longer were the hurried steps on Wall Street. No longer were the cautious looks when she entered the conference room. Now, with every step she took, she carried the gazes of a generation of women waiting to see themselves in her story. The Novalink headquarters lit up as she walked in. Employees stopped what they were doing and applauded. The genuine smiles and emotional looks almost brought Zoe to tears. She raised her hand and said, "Thank you, everyone. But remember, I am not a hero. It is you, the people who believe in this company, that are the reason we can stand here today." The room erupted in applause. Elna stood beside him, smiling proudly. "Zoe, you've been through hell, and you still have a warm heart. Not many people can do that." Zoe smiled, her eyes distant. "I didn't win, Elena. I just passed through. And when I passed through, I took others with me." She turned back to her desk and saw an old photo frame, a picture of her and her father before he passed away. In the photo, he had his hand on her shoulder, smiling kindly. Beneath it was a line he had written in his handwriting, "Daughter, if you can't find a place for yourself, make your own chair." Zoe gently touched the frame, her heart filled with emotion. Everything happened so quickly that she almost forgot why she had chosen this path in the first place. Not for fame, not for power, but to prove that dreams should not be limited by skin color or gender. That afternoon, Vivian Tran stopped by the office. She carried a thick file, her eyes serious. "Zoe, there's something you need to know. This is the FBI's internal investigation report. They found that Omnitech was spying not only on Novalink, but also on many other small startups, especially those led by women." Zoe was speechless. "Oh my God." Vivian nodded. "I'm writing a new story, not just about your case, but about the system where women are subjected to unjustified suspicion. I want you to be part of it, not as a victim, but as someone who has initiated change." Zoe sat in silence for a few seconds, then nodded. "I agree, but I don't want them to feel sorry for me. I want them to see the strength of women like me, calm, determined, and unyielding." Vivian smiled. "That's exactly why I chose you." As Vivian left, Elna walked in with a strange look on her face. "Zoe, someone wants to see you. An older man. He says he's an old colleague of your father's." Zoe was a little surprised. "My father's colleague." A silver-haired man walked in, walking slowly but with a sharp gaze. He introduced himself. "My name is Benjamin Clark. I worked with your father at General Systems. Together, we developed the original design for the self-learning algorithm that you later relied on to build Novalink." Zoe was surprised. "I didn't know he had other partners. My father rarely talks about his past work." Benjamin nodded slightly. "He was betrayed. Zoe, that year, his old company took all his inventions, without pay, without credit. He just smiled and said, One day, my daughter will get back what I lost. Not through litigation, but through justice. I think you did that today." His voice trembled slightly, his eyes moist. Zoe stood still, her heart aching. All the memories of her father came flooding back. The nights he spent sitting silently at his desk. The words he left in the notebook she had once stolen. "If you believe in wisdom, use it to create justice." "Thank you," Zoe said softly, her voice choking. "Thank you for telling me this." Benjamin smiled. "Don't thank me. Go ahead, Zoe. He'll be proud." After he left, Zoe stood by the window, looking out at the people passing by on the street below. She saw her father and the women who worked in those buildings, who still fought every day to be seen, and she knew her work was not yet done. That evening, Zoe called an emergency meeting with the Novalink team. "I want us to expand the Horizon program. It's not just about teaching skills. We're going to build a network, giving women in tech a voice and a place." A young engineer raised his hand, his voice trembling. "Harper, thank you. I once wanted to quit because I was told that women are not suitable for programming. But thanks to you, I still stay." Zoe smiled, her eyes sparkling. "No one has the right to tell you where you don't belong. Only you can define your place." The meeting ended in thunderous applause. Elena approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Zoe, I think your father is smiling somewhere." She nodded, her voice softening. "I think so too." As night fell, Zoe was alone in her office. The city outside was still bright, the traffic still stretched, and she, the woman who had once been stripped of her seat on the plane, now sat in her own chair, steady and free. She opened the notebook and wrote a few lines. "Dad, I have achieved what you dreamed of. But I will not stop there. I will make sure that other girls never have to prove their worth again." A gentle breeze blew through the window, carrying with it the chill of the end of the season. Zoe gently closed the window and leaned her head back on the chair. A rare sense of peace spread through her. Outside, dawn was breaking. A new day was beginning. No more heaviness, no more fear, only the belief that justice, however late it comes, will always find its way. 2 weeks after returning to New York, Zoe received an invitation from the Global Technology Federation, a prestigious organization that brings together the world's greatest innovators, to speak at their annual conference in Washington, D.C., which brings together thousands of industry leaders, engineers, and students. Zoe was speechless as she read the invitation. She remembered that fateful flight. It had been just over a month, and yet her life had changed completely. This time, she wasn't taking the stage to defend herself, but to speak about something bigger: faith, equality, and the power of people. Elena was the first to hear the news. "Zoe, do you understand? This isn't just an invitation. This is an acknowledgement. They heard you." Zoe chuckled. "They hear, but will they understand?" Elena looked at her seriously. "If anyone can make them understand, it's you." Zoe spent the entire week preparing her speech. She didn't hire a scriptwriter or a media team. She wanted every word to come from her heart. At night, as the city fell asleep, she sat by the window, typing slowly, as if writing a letter to the world. Vivian Tran came to see her one morning, bringing a draft of a new article. "Zoe, your story on the Horizon program is getting a lot of attention, but I want to add one more paragraph about your journey, not as a victim, but as a trailblazer." Zoe looked at the draft and smiled. If it can inspire someone to believe they are strong enough to stand up, then do it. 3 days later, she and Elena boarded a flight to Washington. As the plane took off, Zoe looked out the window. White clouds drifted lazily beneath the wings. She suddenly remembered the fateful flight before, when she had been forced to stand up for her seat. This time, she was still sitting in the front row. But there was no fear in her heart, only the serenity of someone who had walked through the darkness. Elena asked softly, "Are you nervous?" Zoe laughed. "If I wasn't nervous, I wouldn't be human." The conference was held at the Kennedy Center. The huge auditorium was filled with lights. When Zoe took the stage, applause erupted. Hundreds of cameras were trained on her. But all she saw was one thing: faces waiting for the truth. "I didn't come here to recount a scandal," she began, her voice soft, low, but clear. "I came here to tell of a flight in which I learned that justice is not something that is given by chance. It must be earned, with courage, with persistence, and with kindness." The atmosphere in the auditorium was heavy, everyone listening to every word. That day, I was asked to leave my seat, a seat I had paid for, a seat I deserved. But when I stood up, I understood that there were other seats being taken in boardrooms, in labs, in lecture halls where women, people of color, or anyone else were looked down upon or doubted. I chose not to be silent. And when I refused to be silent, I saw millions of others stand up with me. Zoe paused, her eyes falling to the front row, where Elena, Vivian, and Miles Jefferson were sitting. She smiled, her voice growing warmer. "Technology is a wonderful tool, but if we don't instill kindness into it, all the progress will only make the world colder. I don't want to create machines that are smarter than humans. I want to create a world where humans are treated smarter." The room fell silent. Then, suddenly, applause erupted first from one corner, then from everywhere. Zoe bowed her head slightly, feeling a lump in her throat. After her speech, many people came up to shake her hand. One young student said through tears, "Ms. Harper, I am the first person in my family to learn programming. Listening to you today, I know I'm not on the wrong path." Zoe hugged the girl. "Never let anyone make you doubt your worth. This world needs you, and people like you." That evening, Zoe left the convention center late. On her way to her car, she saw Captain Miles Jefferson waiting. He smiled. "I hear you. You didn't just get your seat back. You showed the world what it means to sit properly." Zoe laughed, a warm, gentle laugh. "I was just doing what needed to be done." "Captain," he shook his head slightly. "No, you did what the industry needed." They shook hands firmly. There was no need for words at that moment. Back at the hotel, Elena handed Zoe the tablet. "You should see this." On the screen was a series of articles. Zoe Harper, a new voice for justice in technology. Major TV channels replayed her speech. The hashtag #Gain Seat of Justice flooded social media. People shared her quote, "I don't want to build smarter machines. I want to build a smarter world for people." Zoe sat still. She wasn't happy in the way others thought she was. She was just relieved. Relieved to finally hear what she had believed for so many years. Elena sat down beside him. "Zoe, you just opened a door. Now step through." Zoe smiled. "I'm not going it alone. Horizon is the next step. I want to open the first training center in New York. We'll teach coding, artificial intelligence, and leadership, but most of all, teach them to believe in themselves." Elena smiled. I'll draw up a plan tomorrow morning. It looks like Novalink is about to open a new chapter. Zoe stood up and looked out the window. Below, the city of Washington was sparkling with lights. A quiet but profound feeling filled her heart. She knew the journey would not be easy, but at least now she had the most precious thing, human faith, she said softly, as if to herself. If the world has ever made me stand up from my seat, now I will build thousands of more chairs for those who have never had the chance to sit down. The city lights reflected off her face, bright and strong, a confirmation that justice is not a dream. It is a journey, and Zoe Harper is still walking on it, step by step, with all her heart. After the Washington conference, Zoe returned to New York to the welcoming arms of the Novalink team. The entire company felt re-energized. On social media, a series of articles, videos, and podcasts mentioned her name, not as a victim of discrimination, but as a symbol of change. But amid the praise, Zoe still felt a void inside. Every night, as the city lights streamed through her office window, she remembered that first feeling, the humiliation, the confusion, the tightness in her heart as she was kicked out of her seat on the plane. Success didn't erase the memory. It only made it deeper, but also more meaningful. One morning, Elena walked into her room, holding an envelope. "Zoe, this is from Omnitech. They want to see you." Zoe looked at her friend, a little surprised. "See me?" "After all they did," Elena nodded. "I was surprised, too. They said they wanted to discuss a possible collaboration, perhaps to clean up their image," Zoe thought. She understood that this was a familiar strategy for large corporations when they can't suppress a story. They try to join it. But she also saw an opportunity if she did it right. She could turn this meeting into a message more powerful than any speech. "Okay," she said. "We'll meet them. But not in their conference room. They'll come to Novalink." 3 days later, the Omnitech delegation arrived, led by the new CEO, Amanda Fields, a white woman in her 50s with a tough face, but a knowing look in her eyes. They were also accompanied by legal counsel and a media representative. As they entered, Zoe stood and shook each of their hands, her gaze calm. There was no bitterness, just the calm of someone who understood the power of self-control. Amanda began, "Ms. Harper, first of all, I want to apologize on behalf of our company for what happened. Richard Bowen was investigated and held accountable. I know an apology isn't enough, but I want to start over this time, with real cooperation." Zoe looked her straight in the eye. "I don't need a personal apology, Mrs. Fields. I need to see action." Amanda nodded. "I understand. We want to fund your Horizon program not to whitewash, but to truly commit to equity in technology. A $10 million fund, fully managed by Novalink." The room was silent for a few seconds. Elena glanced at Zoe, her eyes questioning. Zoe did not answer immediately. She knew that accepting or rejecting would have great significance. "Finally," she said slowly, "if you want to participate, I have one condition. I will not accept money for Novalink. The money will be used to create scholarships named after women who have been excluded from the technology industry because of prejudice, and the fund will operate independently, run by a multiracial board." Amanda looked surprised for a moment, then smiled. "I accepted, and I think it was the best thing we could do to start over." The meeting ended in relief. As they left, Elena turned to Zoe, her eyes sparkling. "You just turned an apology into a living action. That is true justice." Zoe smiled, soft but deep. "I just think, if you keep hating, you have no room for anything good to grow." The next day, news of the Horizon Fund was announced. The press hailed it as a milestone in American technology history. But what moved Zoe most was not the headlines, but a handwritten letter from a young woman sent to the company's headquarters, Ms. Harper. I was about to drop out of engineering because my teacher told me that women aren't cut out for machines. But after watching your videos, I re-enrolled. I want to be the first person in my family to code. Thank you for paving the way. Zoe read the letter over and over again, then set it on her desk, next to her father's picture. She smiled, tears welling in her eyes. Dad, I think I'm on the right track. In the evening, Zoe and Elena walked along the Hudson River. The night breeze was cool. The bridge lights reflected on the water. Elena asked, Zoe, do you ever regret it? About standing up that day? Zoe shook her head slightly. No. If I had stayed silent that day, I might still be sitting in the back row today, believing I was unworthy. But I stood up, not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been forced to sit down. Elena smiled, her eyes shining with admiration. You didn't just change your story. Zoe, you changed the way a generation's stories are written. The two stood silently, staring at the water. The city in the distance was still glowing. But in Zoe's heart there was another light deeper, more enduring. It was the light of faith restored, of hope spreading like waves. When she returned, Zoe opened her computer and emailed Vivian Tran. Vivian, please write the final chapter of this story. But don't make it about me. Make it about the women who are about to take their first seat. She pressed send, then closed her laptop. Outside, the night wind blew through the glass door, a gentle whisper. Perhaps it was the sound of peace she had been searching for all these years. Before leaving her office, Zoe paused to look around. The Novalink building was brightly lit, filled with laughter, the clatter of keyboards, and eyes sparkling with hope. She whispered to herself, Justice is not just a verdict. It is when a person is seen, heard, and put in their rightful place. And then she walked out of the room, closing the door gently. The last light of the night reflected off the nameplate Zoe Harper, Chief Executive Officer, Novalink Systems. A chair, once a symbol of shame, has become a symbol of pride. And the woman who was forced to leave her seat has now helped thousands of others find theirs. 2 months after the Horizon Fund was officially launched, Novalink entered a period of unprecedented growth. The media hailed Zoe Harper as a new symbol of the spirit of change. Large technology corporations sent invitations to cooperate. Prestigious universities invited her to lecture on leadership and equality in technology. But amid the accolades, Zoe felt the pressure mounting. Her every word was scrutinized, her every action analyzed. She realized that when you become an icon, you no longer belong to yourself. Late one evening, Elena walked into the office and saw Zoe still sitting in front of the screen, her face tense. You're not home yet. Zoe didn't look up. I just finished reading the internal report. Several new Horizon program members are being harassed online. They're being attacked online just for being in the program. Elena sighed. The internet is a double-edged sword. It can lift you up, and it can also tear you down. Zoe leaned back in her chair. I can't protect them from everything, but I can't let them get hurt because they believed what I said. She stood up and walked to the window to look at the city lights. Elena, do you ever feel afraid? Afraid that you are just dragging everyone else into a never-ending war? Elena was silent for a few seconds. Yes, but then I remembered. If we don't do anything, who will Zoe? You can't stop the waves, but you can teach them to swim. Zoe smiled slightly. The words were like a beacon in the night. A few days later, Vivian Tran visited. She brought with her printed copies of public feedback on the Horizon program. Thousands of people signed up, but there was also a lot of criticism. Some extremist groups said she was dividing society by emphasizing race and gender. Zoe skimmed through it, her eyes darkening. They don't understand that I don't want to tear anyone apart. I'm just reclaiming the equity they've forgotten to give us. Vivian nodded. I know, and I will write it. That evening, Zoe attended a live television talk show. The famous host, his voice sharp, asked bluntly, Ms. Harper, some people are saying that you are using your story for political influence. What do you have to say in response? The studio was silent. Zoe smiled, her eyes calm. If me standing up for justice for women and people of color is political, then maybe justice is the politics I'm willing to pursue. But what I do is not against anyone. It's so that we can all stand up together, as equals. The audience applauded. The host looked confused. After the broadcast, social media exploded with support. Zoe's quote went viral. Fairness is not a privilege. It's a starting point. However, a few days later, an incident occurred. A hacker attacked Novalink's network system, posting a series of internal information. The media widely believed that the company had a serious security breach. Zoe immediately called an emergency meeting. We can't let this crisis define us, she said firmly. Elena checked the data. It seems to be a targeted attack. It could be from the remnants of Omnitech or the online resistance group. Zoe was silent, then said, I don't care who's behind it. I just care how we react. She asked the technical team to review the entire system and make a transparent announcement to the press. She also proactively posted a video on social media. Speaking frankly about the incident, I know there are people who want to scare us, to keep us quiet, but I believe that transparency is strength. Novalink has nothing to hide. We are just doing what technology should do, confronting errors and fixing them, not hiding from them. The video went viral faster than the negative news. Millions of shares, thousands of supportive comments. One person wrote, Zoe Harper is more than a CEO. She is an example of how to face a crisis with truth. That evening, when things were quiet, Zoe sat alone in the conference room. She opened her laptop, looking at the screen that reflected her tired face. Suddenly, the door opened and Miles Jefferson walked in. Ms. Harper, I'm in Washington. I flew over as soon as I heard the news. I just wanted to see if you were okay. Zoe looked up, surprised but smiling. I'm fine, at least until someone tells me to rest. Miles chuckled. You know, that day on the plane, I didn't think things would go this far. But looking at you now, I understand. One small thing can change the world, if you stand up for it firmly enough. Zoe looked at him silently, her eyes warm. Thank you, Captain. If you hadn't done the right thing that day, maybe things would have been different. Miles nodded slightly. I just did the right thing. You made the right thing inspiring. The two of them were silent for a long time. Outside, the nightlight was still on, but in the room, only the soft light from the screen remained, shining on two people who had once been caught up in the same story, and now, together, writing the next chapter of justice. Zoe whispered, Captain, do you think true justice will ever come? It's coming. Zoe, Miles replied firmly, and you're leading the way. That statement was like a promise. That night, Zoe left the office very late. On her way home, she saw billboards along the avenue that read Horizon Program, opening the future for everyone. She smiled, placing her hand on her heart. No need for fame, no need for power. She just needs to know that, somewhere, a girl is walking into a technology class. A black boy is believing he can be an engineer, and a woman is no longer afraid to sit in the first chair. She said softly, "If this is a storm, I am willing to go through it, because on the other side of the storm, there is always light." 3 months after the cyber attack, Novalink was fully recovered. The company's improvements in data security and transparency became a model for major tech companies to follow. The Horizon program also grew faster than expected. More than 2,000 women from across the United States participated. Universities began teaching partnerships, and many businesses opened their doors to recruit the program's first students. One early autumn morning, Zoe stood by her office window, looking out at New York City in the golden sunshine. Leaves were falling slowly on the sidewalk, blending with the bustling crowd. Elena walked in, a thick stack of documents in her hand. "Elena, do you see?" Zoe said softly. "All of this was just my father's dream. Now it's really happening." Elena smiled. "Not just your father's, Zoe, but the thousands of people who thought their dreams were beyond their reach." She put the documents on the table. "I just received a letter from the White House. They want to award you the Citizenship Medal of Honor for your contributions to social justice and technology education." Zoe was speechless. She looked at Elena in disbelief. "A medal?" Elena nodded, her smile widening. "Yes, you changed the system. They want to acknowledge that." Zoe was silent for a long moment, then exhaled softly. "I don't do this for a reward, Elena, but maybe I should accept it, on behalf of those who have never been seen, never been heard." Elena nodded slightly. "And you will say that when you receive the award." The ceremony took place in Washington, D.C., in a brightly lit ballroom. Key figures from government, technology, and media were present. When Zoe stepped onto the podium, the entire audience stood up and applauded. She wore a simple white suit, her face serene, her posture steady. She received the medal from the president, then turned back to the audience. Her voice was soft but full of weight. "I don't stand here because I'm better than anyone else. I stand here because one day I was asked to leave my chair. And instead of walking away, I chose to stay. Not to compete, but to prove that I have as much right to be there as anyone else." The room fell silent. Zoe continued, her voice growing warm and steady. "I accept this award on behalf of everyone who has ever been made to doubt their worth. For the women who were told they weren't strong enough, the people of color who weren't told they weren't smart enough, and the kids who grew up believing their opportunities weren't meant for them. I want them to know, equality doesn't come from magic. It comes from each person who stands up when they're pushed down." She paused, smiling slightly. "And I want to say to every girl out there, if someone tells you that you don't belong here, don't leave. Sit down, hold your head up high, and do your job. Because when you do that, the world will adjust to accommodate you." The applause was thunderous. Many were in tears. Vivian Tran, sitting in the front row, took notes and wiped her eyes. Elena stood backstage, her hands clasped together, her eyes shining with indescribable pride. After the ceremony, Zoe met Miles Jefferson again. He shook her hand, his voice full of emotion. "You did it. Zoe, you didn't just take back your seat. You created a pew for the next generation." Zoe smiled. "I did what anyone in that situation would do. But thank you, Captain. If you hadn't chosen justice that day, I probably wouldn't be standing here today, Miles replied, his eyes gentle. Perhaps justice always begins with small actions that we think are normal. On their return to New York, Zoe, Elena, and Vivian stopped by the newly opened Horizon Center. In the brightly lit room, dozens of young girls were intently studying programming. A brown-skinned girl of about 16 looked up when she saw Zoe enter. "Miss Harper, are you really Miss Harper?" Her voice was trembling. Zoe smiled and stepped closer. "It's me. How long have you been here?" "Yes, just 3 weeks. I want to learn artificial intelligence. My dad said if you can do it, I can too." Zoe leaned down and put a hand on her shoulder. "Your father is right. You can do it even better than me. Just don't let anyone make you doubt it." The little girl smiled, her eyes sparkling. Elena stood watching and said softly to Vivian, "This is the real reward." Vivian nodded. "I will recount this moment, not to glorify it, but to show that good things do exist, as long as we are patient." That evening, when Zoe got home, she sat on the balcony, the autumn wind caressing her hair. The city in the distance sparkled like a sky full of stars. She opened her father's old notebook and turned to the last page. Underneath the words he had written, she added a few new lines. "Father, I sat in my rightful place, and I saved it for those who came later." She closed the book, leaned back in her chair, and let herself be carried away by the sound of the wind. She was no longer the woman whose seat had been taken away from her on the plane. She was the woman who had changed the way the world treated people like her. A tear rolled down my cheek, not because of pain, but because I knew my journey was finally complete. Zoe looked up at the sky and whispered, "I kept my promise, Dad." Under the moonlight, her face lit up with radiance. A new chapter opened, not with applause, but with peace of mind. Zoe Harper's story is more than just an incident on a plane. It is a vivid example of how the smallest actions can sometimes be life-changing and transformative. When faced with injustice, we all have a choice: stay silent or stand up. Zoe chose to stand up, but she not only stood up for her own rights, but also opened the door for thousands of other women to be respected, heard, and believed in their own abilities. The important lesson we can learn is that justice and respect do not come naturally. We need to have the courage to stand up for our values, be steadfast in our moral choices, and at the same time use our influence to create positive change for others, whether in the workplace, at home, or in society. Every action matters, and steadfastness can have an impact beyond imagination. Zoe's story also reminds us of the power of alliances and companionship. Friends, colleagues, and allies can help us stand up for what is right. But most importantly, we stand up for ourselves. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you find the message in the video inspiring and valuable, please like, share the video with your loved ones, and subscribe to the channel to continue following our inspiring stories of courage, justice, and positive change in life.